So I think we'll get started. Rolling onto the title slide here. So officially, good afternoon, good morning to those joining from around the world. Welcome to the Q3 Summertime CIID webinar titled, What is a Data Standard? The Common Education Data Standards to Support State Staff. So welcome on behalf of Bill Hennekins, who's the CIID lead, and all CIID staff. We've as I said, we're expecting a full house joining from around the country. Here in the Northeast in Massachusetts, we're kicking off summer. I feel sort of like one of the lucky ones that it's only 104 degrees today, not so dramatic as some of our colleagues who are spread out in the West and Northwest. We hope that you have a way of staying cool and comfortable and also safe. I wanted to introduce you to the team who'll be carrying the presentation today. I'm just here to introduce. My name is Dan Mello. I'm the lead of the Targeted and Universal Technical Assistance at CIID. And we've called on two specific colleagues today to compose and present today's webinar. Andrea Hall is a CIID TA provider, and she wears another hat as well as the TA lead for CEDS. We're lucky to have her. If you've got a technical question on CEDS, she can answer it. And we're also receiving guidance today from Rachel Wilkinson. And we've called on her and her contributions, not only for her CEDS capacity, but also as her experience as a data manager formerly in the state of Tennessee. So we hope that her perspective is going to add a lot of value today. We know it will. As we get started, I just want to share a special thanks to Darren Wright and Travis Peterson, Lindsay Wise, and others at CIID for helping to produce this session. We think it's going to be some rich content. We hope it's engaging, and we hope it inspires lots of questions from you. Rolling forward into the objectives, by way of further introduction, we have 4 learning objectives today. We want to introduce CEDS, the CEDS tools, talk about the value of CEDS and the future of CEDS. Specifically, we'll be building a common understanding of CEDS vocabulary and purpose, and we'll be learning about the tools that will get us to that end goal. And we'll have a more general discussion about the value of CEDS to the general education community, but also to specifically data managers and associated staff. And we want to put on the table some opportunities that we really think are just knocking on our door. And as our community continues to grow, I think these possibilities become very rich. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel, who's going to talk about our poll results. Rachel?
Thanks, Dan. All right, we've got our poll results. I know they just pulled up on my screen, so hopefully you got them as well. So just recapping the 2 questions we had, have you used CEDS, which is the Common Education Data Standards? And we have 60% of the respondents saying yes, they had, and 40% saying no. And then on a scale of 1 to 4, how comfortable are you with using CEDS? We have about 34% who say not at all comfortable, 54% somewhat comfortable, 9% very comfortable, and the elite 3% who are extremely comfortable. Well, that's great. I think it's awesome that we'll have a group who has at least some basic knowledge of CEDS, although we are going to present this content at a high level to try and engage those who may not have that same level of familiarity. But we are hoping that by the end of the day today, you'll learn some more and feel a little better equipped to address any CEDS work that you might be considering. So with those poll findings in mind, if you close out those results, you can see that we do have a question, and I just wanted to give a minute if anyone wanted to share in the chat questions about CEDS that you would like answered today. And I can't promise that we will have the final answer today, but it will at least guide us in ways to continue supporting you and make sure we can at least touch on anything that's standing out as important to you. I'll give just a minute. All right. I'm sure that actually wasn't a minute, but it's funny how webinars always feel long. Oh, perfect. Dan was kind enough to put in the chat, how long has the CEDS initiative been in place? We can talk about that. Andrea will introduce the initiative a little bit and she can give that context. That's a great question. Any others? And as you think of any throughout the presentation, you can always pop them into the chat at any time, and we'll make sure to save those and respond as we go, or if we run out of time, send a response so that you can have the information you need. Well, let's go ahead and jump to the next slide. All right. So we want to thank you all for coming today. And during our call, we're hoping that you'll be able to walk away with some ideas of how CEDS can support you, and particularly those of you who are data managers. I know that this is a session really geared towards Part B data managers, so we wanted to make sure we kept you in mind as the user or the audience member. And I know as a former data manager, these were some of the questions that I would receive, or comments I would receive from LEAs over the years. So things like, where did you get this data from when you submit reports to LEAs? These data are wrong, but also inexplicably, I've never seen this information before. Or someone entered the data incorrectly, so it's a data entry issue. Or no one uses this data, so it's not that important. I'm guessing many of you on the call, especially data managers, have heard similar things like this. And CEDS really can be an incredibly helpful tool to quickly address these questions and comments, to know where you get data from, to know where someone entered it and how they should have entered it, to track this information to help LEAs and any stakeholders better understand the information we're reporting, particularly on the IDEA side of things. So with that, I'm actually going to go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Andrea, and she'll discuss what CEDS and data standards as a whole are.
Thanks, Rachel. Good afternoon, everyone. So data standards. What is a data standard? Well, a data standard is a commonly agreed upon definition and specification for data elements. Data standards reduce redundancy, and they're useful for tracking data that isn't easy to compare otherwise. The Common Education Data Standards, also known as CEDS, is a data management initiative that began over 11 years ago and has grown into one of the most widely adopted education data standards in the country. Next slide. The CEDS standard includes data elements, definitions, and the allowable option sets for those elements. For example, in CEDS, the element primary disability type has a standard set of options already defined that you can use, such as autism, developmental delay, and speech and language impairments, to name a few. Now, while a data manager would probably be most interested in K-12, the CEDS standard does include the full P20 through workforce spectrum. That means we have information in CEDS from early learning all the way through to workforce. And CEDS has everything from student to staff to parents, from demographics to IDEA to discipline to assessments, even credentials. So if something gets tracked in education, CEDS most likely has it. And if it doesn't have an element, you can propose that an element be added through the CEDS open source community. Next slide, please. So speaking of the CEDS community, it wouldn't really be right to talk about the data standards without mentioning the community. The CEDS open source community is the driving force behind the CEDS standard. So new elements are introduced by the community and they are approved by the community. And the CEDS community is truly a community. It's not a select group of individuals making the decisions about the growth of CEDS. It's an entire collective of people with a shared interest in education. Anyone is welcome to become part of the community. And once you begin using CEDS and aligning your data, the more you're going to know about your data and the more ideas you're going to have for how it can be managed. And that is how the CEDS standard grows, by people like you sharing your ideas and contributing through the CEDS community. And now I'm going to turn it over to Rachel quickly to do a pop quiz.
All right. So we're going to pause here for a moment and take a little quiz. And what we've just displayed on the screen were some codes that different states use to capture particular data elements related to IDEA reports. So if you could just look them over and let me know in the chat whether you think all of these codes are related, or if you think that they're related to many different data elements, let me know in the chat. And if you think they do relate to just one data element, what data element do you think that might be? Give you guys a little bit to respond. Okay, Don Kemp has shared LRE 5 and 6. So the state performance plan and annual performance report indicators 5 and 6. Any other guesses what these codes might relate to? Okay, great. Anne shared ed environments for the 089 and the 002 child count files. All right, well, let's go ahead and advance and show the answer. So both of you were correct. They are all related to the data element, shall we say, in the 089 and the 002 EdFax files, educational environment. Now, if you looked at all those codes independently, like say PLG 79 or IDEA 17, it would be hard to know independently just by that code alone exactly what the data element is that it relates to. And that's the importance of CEDS, is it really creates a common language. It's impossible to work out what all different data elements that each individual state or entity uses might be, so that CEDS standard language increases the understanding and the ability to communicate better, both within states and then with other states. We can go to the next slide. Turn it over to Andrea.
And what Rachel just demonstrated is how CEDS can be used as a common language between data systems to help you communicate with internal and external stakeholders. And that's a huge part of what CEDS is all about. So far we've learned that CEDS is an education data management initiative. It's a data standard with elements, and it's an open source community. CEDS also has a free online tool set to help you with data management, which we'll learn about in a few minutes. First, I want to talk about the domain entity schema. So this is the domain entity schema, and this is where you're going to find the data elements that you need. What you see are the different domains that make up the domain entity schema. And these represent different ways to group education data. So this slide is an example of how data are grouped within the domain entity schema. Each grouping expands to show you more information. So using primary disability type as an example, if you want to map to that element, you will start with K-12 domain, then go to the K-12 student entity, then go to the disability category, where you'll find the element primary disability type. Now remember, domain is the highest component of similar data elements, and the smallest component is the data element itself. And that's what you're after. So if you're a data manager using CEDS, your focus is going to be primarily on K-12 data. So the K-12 domain and the K-12 student entity are where you'll find the most information that you need. And this is what you're going to see if you selected primary disability type from the domain entity schema. These are the element details. Now sometimes element details can be overwhelming, but if we look at this slide, what do we know about this element? Well, we know the definition, we know it's used for EdFax reporting, and we can also see the different types of disabilities that make up the option set for this particular element. Can you go back there? Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, CEDS includes free online tools that help you manage your IDEA data. The tools in CEDS include Align, Connect, and myConnect. Next slide. So aligning the data dictionaries for your systems to CEDS is called mapping, and it's the starting place for most data management activities. So whether you're in the process of integrating your data systems, or if your state is implementing Generate, for example, aligning your data to CEDS is where you're going to begin. Align lets you document the specific details about your elements, including where they're located in your systems. For example, if you're integrating data, you can't very well move it from one location to another if you don't know where it lives in the first place. And this is also why we recommend that when you begin aligning or mapping your data elements to CEDS, that you do it in collaboration with others, such as IT folks. So IT is generally responsible for determining the location and structure of the data in a database, while data managers and other program staff would know the data from a business perspective and a programmatic perspective. So working together is important and highly recommended when mapping your data or defining new elements. Align can also help you communicate better with your LEAs and help you back up your findings. So if you've mapped your systems or data collections to CEDS, you can download a report from Align and share that report with the LEA. And this will tell them and show them exactly where you're getting the data from. Now, aligning your data systems to CEDS also gives you access to various reports that let you compare data between systems, programs, or even state education agencies. It also allows for data sharing. So for example, let's say you have neighboring states where students move across state lines regularly, and you are building a system that will let you share certain information about the student with the other states. Each state involved in the sharing agreement could map their data elements that they plan to share to CEDS, and this would create a bridge between those elements from each state. This bridge ensures that each state is talking the same language and sharing the same data. CEDS also gives you a way to be transparent about the data you're collecting. So once you've aligned your data systems to CEDS, you can share those maps publicly. And this creates transparency. And transparency removes some of the assumptions around what data are being collected, which can promote better communication and lead to better questions about the data. Next slide. So this is an example of what a report in CEDS looks like. This is one of the map-based reports found in Align, and it's based on the maps that you've created for your systems. This report compares maps to one another. So you can compare your map to another state's map, or you can use this report to compare your own maps to one another. For example, if you've created a map for your student data and another map for your special education data, you can use this report to compare the data elements between those maps. This is one way to see where there are duplicates in your data collection or where you might have gaps. This report is great for data governance because it identifies which systems are collecting the same information. And having this information readily available can help the team make informed decisions about the data, such as which system should be the system of record or that authoritative source. And now I'm going to ask Rachel to explain how this report would be valuable to a data manager.
Thank you. So I know that, oh, if we can go back to the report real quickly. Perfect. Thank you. So I know firsthand that data managers, you often are having to reconcile data between different systems. So maybe a special education data system or a student data information system. You're having to try and interpret where the different things you need are and where they live. And so it can be really difficult to manage that, and running a report like this can compare the fields that are mapped in both data systems. So in this example, we have our student data system and the special education data system, and you can see for each field which maps align to each system. And it can determine what the authoritative source or the source system is. So where do you want to be pulling your information from consistently as a state for things like race and ethnicity, or gender, or English learner status. You should determine what system is really the source or authority. Maybe it's the system where you upload data that comes in from your LEAs from their student information system, but you do ultimately want to be consistent. So this report can help you ensure that consistency. And now we can go to the next slide.
So Connect. CEDS Connect is a place where you can go to document different things, such as reporting requirements, metrics, or indicators. Each connection includes a section where you can document the CEDS elements that will be required for a particular output, such as a report, as well as a place for you to document how those elements will be used to create that output. One way to think about this is if it's like a recipe. So a recipe is going to list out all the ingredients you need to make something, like apple pie. And it will tell you how those ingredients should be mixed together to make that apple pie come out right and taste like it's supposed to. A connection does the same thing. It lets you list out the CEDS elements or those ingredients that you would need to create some sort of output. And it lets you document how those elements or those ingredients should be mixed together to produce that output in a standard way. You can also use Connect to document calculations, like how your state does something specific. For example, there are different metrics that go into a state's report card. So you could document the business rules for that in Connect.
All right, and I did want to note that there are some other things that can be particularly valuable about Connect. So it can really be used in many ways for data requests. So let's say you as a Part B data manager, you need your assessment data for indicator 3 for the SPP APR. That's the state performance plan and annual performance report. And so if you went in and you built a connection and you identified all the elements you need, you could document how those elements should be pulled and then ultimately aggregated or pulled together for you for your indicator 3 report. You can do this in a connection and then download that connection, and you can actually take it to the team who might be responsible for the data. So maybe your accountability team or your assessment team, and you can go ahead and give that to them and ensure that they can pull the data for you correctly, give you everything you need, and aggregate it in the correct way. Another example that I thought of when I was reading about Connect, and I think it would have certainly helped me when I worked in a state, is routine data requests. So say you get the same request every couple months from the legislature about the number of students in each disability category. Rather than having to remember, gee, where did I get this from last time? Or I'm going to need to set aside a Word document where I track this information. You could actually create a connection where you detail every data element you're going to want. So the student's information, their disability category, maybe even drill down to the race, ethnicity, or gender details. But you can put all of that information into a connection, and that will help you consistently know where the data are located. This can also help with sustainability. So it ensures that, say tomorrow you get promoted or win the lottery or no longer in your role and you have a successor who needs to pull this information coming in after you, rather than trying to clamor and figure out, gee, how do I get this information for the legislature? There can be an explicit connection that's saved in the system that you can go pull, and it will tell you again where data live and how to pull it exactly for your report. So just something to keep in mind that a connection could do for you as a data manager.
So another tool in CEDS is myConnect. And myConnect represents a set of CEDS elements that are needed for a particular report or some other output. It compares the elements in a connection to the elements in a map. And this comparison will tell you whether you're collecting the elements needed to run a report or some other output, and where those elements can be found in your system. So let's use EdFacts as an example. So every EdFacts file has an existing connection built for it. So that means we have a connection in CEDS for child count. Now, if you've created maps in CEDS, you can access the child count connection and run myConnect and compare the elements in the connection to the elements in your map. And the results will line up the elements from the connection and the map side by side. And this shows you whether your map includes the necessary elements to run child count and also where those elements are located in your state system. Now I'm going to turn things over to Rachel, who will show you a little more of myConnect, as well as some of the other features of CEDS.
Great, thank you, Andrea. So this is just a visual of what the report would look like if you ran that child count connection. So I just wanted to highlight some things on this report. You can see that the elements that are required to actually complete the child count report are listed on the far left in this screenshot. And those are the CEDS elements that are put together. And they list out every single required field for each specific EdFax reports. And then you also have your two data systems in this example state. So the special education data system is in the middle, and then the student data system or student information system would be on the far right. And what this is doing is comparing each of the CEDS elements to see where they're mapped in each of the respective systems. So the maps might look different for each of the systems, but they're ultimately linking back to the item in question. So it can be really helpful when you're trying to determine where you want to pull your data from. It can tell you, wow, I don't need to get this information from my special education data system because I know manual entry is used and that might mess something up. So I'm going to pull it from my student data system, anything that's demographics based, say, for child count. And that way, that will be our system of record, and it's what every other report that's submitted to EdFax uses as the system of record. So this is just a way that you can see all the connections that are built around each CEDS element that's needed for the EdFax child count file. And this can also be really helpful when you're trying to look at gaps in data. So maybe you pull up this list and you see that you have connections established for the CEDS elements for almost all of them, except when you get down to, say, educational environment. And then you see that there's a blank space under the special education data system and the student data system. That blank space would indicate that there is not a map established, which means that currently you are not mapped to the required field. This is just a good alert to let you know I need to go pull this information and map how to get there if I want to complete my CEDS, the whole list of CEDS elements for my EdFax file. So it's just another way that you can look at your data to try and identify both the system to use and then if there are any issues or lack of elements with maps. We can go ahead to the next slide. And so I wanted to sort of conceptualize as a data manager what the real world application of CEDS might look like. And so we know that for some IDEA reports, data comes from multiple systems. We've talked about this in the examples we've shown already. But let's stick with the child count example that we've been using. So maybe in your state, you pull special education specific fields like disability category or educational environment data from a special education data system. But you pull your student demographics like gender, race, ethnicity, English learner status from the statewide student information system. CEDS can really help clarify where the different data are coming from so that you're pulling the data from the system of record and pulling it from the same source across all reports. And this can be particularly important, not just when thinking about IDEA reports, say, but also all the other EdFax reports like membership files. We know that some EdFax reports are used when calculating other IDEA reports outside of the EdFax files, say the SPP and APR, or things like significant disproportionality. So it's important that the reports align, that you're pulling data from a consistent source. So let's take significant disproportionality. I think most data managers, probably most of you on this call, pull the IDEA data related to identification from child count files, so the 002 and the 089 files. And then you might get the comparison data for identification from the EdFax membership file. And so as a requirement of significant disproportionality around identification, you're comparing the number of students identified with a disability by race and ethnicity or 6 disability categories, as compared to all the students in the school district, broken out as well by race and ethnicity. But a problem that could exist is if you're not pulling that race and ethnicity for both of the reports from the same file. So let's say you're pulling race and ethnicity for your child count file from your student information system that's special education specific, but you're pulling the race and ethnicity for your membership file from your overarching statewide student information system. There could be an issue where the race and ethnicity don't line up. So maybe in the membership file, a student is reported as white, and in the child count file, the same student is reported as Hispanic. That could be quite problematic. It could upset your risk ratios and have some negative implications. So that's just underscoring how valuable it can be to really know where the data is coming from. All right. Awesome, thank you. Sorry, my computer is lagging for a second. All right, so these are just some more of the overall value of CEDS. So when you're completing the mapping work that Andrea referenced, states can actually better understand and see what data elements are captured in the state and where they come from. And that can help your users as well, both internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. And this can ultimately help data quality, because CEDS really standardizes the data elements that are used for the reporting. And when you map that information, it tells users exactly what you're collecting. So there's no ambiguity, you know what you need, you know where you're getting it from. That creates data quality and confidence in the data. And then by standardizing the data elements, it allows everyone to use a common language or common terminology when talking about them. So that can be particularly helpful when you're communicating with internal and external stakeholders, or even other states. Someone in one state may refer to an educational environment in one way, thinking back to those codes we shared earlier in our little quiz, whereas someone in another state may use a completely different term. And that might create an incompatibility to communicate about that information. By using CEDS, you have that common standard language that everyone's using. And CEDS can also help with the data governance piece. So the tools that Andrea discussed, they really promote master data management and documenting the ownership of data elements, as well as how they're shared, they're accessed, they're integrated, and they're used both within your state and across states. And ultimately, all of this improves the transparency. It clearly articulates in a more sustainable and detailed way exactly how states collect and report their data. So that's the overall value of CEDS, but let's talk a little bit on the next slide about the value of CEDS for data managers themselves. So creating high quality reports, it really requires a clear understanding of business rules. So identifying the location of the source data is really a foundational piece of any business rule. You have to know the data elements that you need to ultimately apply rules to them and generate a report. So when creating IDEA reports through CEDS, you could determine, and I know I've given this example a couple times, but I just wanted to reiterate, you could determine that in our state, race and ethnicity comes from the Power School Student Information System. That's the authoritative source. No one can edit it. It comes straight from our school districts and populates our state system. So if I'm a data manager at the state, now I know when I write my business rules as a data manager, I don't want to pull race and ethnicity from anywhere other than Power School's student information system, because that's what everyone else is using, and we want to be consistent to the maximum extent possible. And if your source systems are actually mapped to CEDS and say a new data element is suddenly introduced to a collection, maybe suddenly now you have to capture students who are homeless or economically disadvantaged in the child count file. I'm not saying that's happening. I'm just saying in a hypothetical world, we all know these things can happen. So let's say that that happens. And you as a data manager are thinking, I don't even know where to go to find this. I get most of my information from school districts or from my special education data system. Well, the nice thing about CEDS is if someone else in your state is already capturing those values, you can go and look that up. You can find that information and know where it's located and know how you can apply those codes to meet your reporting requirements. You're not constantly having to reinvent the wheel or develop new processes to capture information because it might already be captured. And then there are also fields and align maps that I think are fantastic. And again, thinking back to myself working in a state, I would have loved to have known about this, that there are fields and align maps where you can actually dictate kind of who the owner, so to speak, or the data steward is for a specific data element. So if I'm having a big challenge with disability categories where I think the codes don't look right, or they're not pulling as I'm expecting them to pull, or maybe values need to be updated that have not been, I can go into Align and I can see, okay, this person is responsible for this system and this particular field in the system, and here's their contact information, rather than kind of having to comb through your state directory or hunt around and find who might know how to address an issue. It's located in that central space. And then finally, when you're starting up this work and mapping your data elements, that will really set you up for success moving forward. I'm not sure how many of you on this call are considering automating your data files and your EdFax files in particular. There is a work that we do with the system Generate around IDEA reports. But if that's something you're considering moving towards, mapping this data to CEDS is the first and most crucial step to ensure that those reports are being generated correctly and automated and uploaded, and they're accurate. So those are some of the values for data managers. We can go ahead to the next slide. Sort of looking ahead. So as you're planning for this future, there are several things that you may want to consider. And the first might be that using CEDS can actually help you collaborate and learn not just within your own agency, but also from other states. So there are several states who right now are actually using something called a CEDS data warehouse. It has the same underlying structure for all the states because it's using those common data elements. And that can be really beneficial if you want to share information with another state who also has the warehouse, or they want to share information with you. So let's say as an example, we have state A and state B, and both of them are using the CEDS warehouse. In the future, if state A were to put a business intelligence tool, and when I say that, I'm talking about something like Tableau, so something pretty that sits on top of a database and makes charts or graphs or tables that are much easier for people to understand and much more attractive to look at. So if state A decided I'm going to put Tableau on top of my data warehouse to generate these really pretty reports, then state B could actually get that code and do the exact same thing in their state. They wouldn't have to recreate the code and create their own tool and formatting to lay on top of the structure because they both have the same data warehouse and all of their data is mapped to CEDS. So you don't have to always be relying just on yourself, but you can look to others to see how they're handling things as well. And now is really the time to get ahead of the curve. So as EdFax continues to move forward, many states have already started mapping to CEDS and submitted IDEA reports through an automated process. And more states are just continuing to do this mapping work and the submission process that's more automated. This is also something that we know that the Department of Education has prioritized and communicated, I believe, at the Stats DC conference, that this is really the direction they'd like to go with mapping to CEDS and automating EdFax files as much as possible. So it's just something to keep in mind looking forward. But ultimately, data standardization is really key. And CEDS is already an existing solution to standardization. It's widely used, and there's a whole community to support users. So it's really the best place to start. All right. So on the next slide, thank you. I've given a ton of information and you've had to listen to me ad nauseum, and now we're going to get to the part where we want to ask for your thoughts, questions, and feedback. But just some basic tips to think about before you get started. Start out small. So if you approach CEDS as I'm going to map all my data elements and I'm going to do it over this time frame that's really tight and I have to do them all, it will be overwhelming and it may not be successful, or at least not as successful as if you decided I'm going to tackle smaller tasks. I'm going to talk, sort of pick out pieces of how I'm going to address the mapping process and have big wins early on, because that encourages you to want to continue doing it. There has to be a value and there has to be a payoff. But if you're starting out so big that you can't even see that end of the line, that can be certainly quite challenging. And as you're doing any of the work, any alignment to CEDS, always remember that there are people who can help. There's the CEDS team, and they are always available for any questions that you might have. They're a great resource. So contact them before you get to a point of frustration if you start doing this work that you don't even want to do it anymore. They are always available as a resource. And then ultimately, something to make sure you consider is that you're using data governance best practices as you work with CEDS. That will include collaborating with others in your agency. So you shouldn't have to, as the data manager, be off on your own, doing all the mapping by yourself, but instead you can work with others. You may need to contact your IT staff, your accountability team, all the different people you might interact with who may own or work with the similar data elements that you do. Ensuring that you are all on the same page and establishing a data governance structure will just make the implementation all the more successful. So with that, I am going to stop talking and we'd like to hear a little bit from you all. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
Thanks, Rachel. Wow, thank you both. Thanks, Rachel and Andrea, for sharing your perspectives and your expertise. At the beginning of today's webinar, we noted that there were many participants with less experience and knowledge around CEDS. And I know that there will be, after this presentation, a few participants who want to know even more. I can say for sure that getting into CEDS, it's really valuable, the output really valuable. It's very helpful to have a little bit of guidance and facilitation on your first way through. So, we would look forward to supporting you through that. We have some questions on the screen about your initial reactions. I encourage you to share them in the chat here. Before we do wrap up, there will be a link shared for evaluation. But for now, I'd like to spend some time focusing on these questions. Go ahead and put your responses to any of these questions in the chat. We do have some time if you'd like to unmute. What are your initial reactions? What other questions do you have about CEDS? How do you think CEDS might be valuable in your role? And would you like to learn more about CEDS? In particular, I think it is especially important to think about the way that CEDS can support data managers in terms of documentation of their business rules as they can endure over time. They can help locating data in their source systems so that those answers are always readily available. And as we saw, for identifying responsibility for particular data elements as roles and staff change over time. And in particular, the CEDS work is already supporting states in a mapping capacity for EdFacts reporting. That will certainly be critical as EdFacts evolves. And I think what I'm personally most excited about is the way that states might be able to leverage their community in CEDS to create shared resources for enhanced BI reporting. Any initial reactions to CEDS? If you came in a little bit more comfortable, were things confirmed? Did you learn something new today in this sort of high-level presentation? I think Gretchen, Gretchen says that was a reinforcement of some things that she had learned a while ago. I'm really glad to hear it. Gwen has asked for us to share about the level of effort or time investment for CEDS activities.
A lot of that depends on your experience using CEDS and how much data you plan to map. There is a general rule, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but starting out, it will take you a little bit more time, but that's when it's really important to reach out to the CEDS team and get assistance with your mapping. If you have any questions or just need help getting started, that's the time to reach out. But it really does just depend on your comfort level using CEDS and how much data you have planned to map. But I can certainly follow up with you, Gwen, afterwards and give you the general rule that we have regarding mapping. So I'll make sure I do that after the presentation.
Thanks, Andrea. I think this, you know, the CEDS, it's also sensible to us, and you can imagine if there were an effort to standardize data, that it would look just like this because it's really logical. The experience and the learning curve, as I said before, it can be really helpful to have a TA provider coach you through your first experience and be a resource as you go forward. So I would encourage you to do so. Great question, thank you. If there aren't any further questions for today, we invite you to contact us by emailing cita@aemcorp.com, or you can reach out to the CEDS initiative via the link at ceds.ed.gov/contact-us-ASPX. This has been, as I said, a really great introduction by Rachel and Andrea. We hope that there's interest and the potential for an opportunity to dive a little deeper on some of the more technical aspects of CEDS to build capacity a bit more, whether that's in the form of universal TA throughout a webinar or a little bit more personalized support via states. We're going to wrap up today and with a share of the next slide, which is going to be a link to our evaluation. It's important for us as we deliver universal TA to receive feedback to ensure that you found the information that we've shared useful, accurate, timely, responsive to your needs. The link provided on the screen is also in the chat where you can copy and paste. I don't think you can click it. Maybe you can click it. But at the very least, you could copy and paste, put it in a browser. We do ask that you complete that as soon as possible. If you're not able to complete it at this time, we're going to be following up by email so that we can be sure to get your input on our process and product today. We have a few people signing off. We wish you a very cool day. We hope to see you again soon. We're going to stick around for a few more minutes, but this will conclude our presentation. Please do complete the evaluation and do take care. Thank you, everyone.